The origins of Proto-Semites. Where is the best place of the origins for Proto-Semites? We covered the many origins of Proto-Semites, mainly the Horn of Africa, Eastern Sahara, North Africa, and the Levant with the Natufians. The Semitic family is a member of the larger Afro-Asiatic family, all of whose other 5 or more branches have their origin in North Africa or the Maghreb. Largely for this reason, the ancestors of Proto-Semitic speakers were originally believed by some to have first arrived in the Middle East from North Africa, possibly as part of the operation of the Saharan pump around the late Neolithic. This was in red. In green, it says Dankoff sees Semitic originating between the Nile Delta and Canaan as the northernmost branch of Afro-Asiatic. In blue, it reads, Bench even wonders whether the highly divergent Greg languages indicate an origin in Ethiopia, with the rest of Ethiopic Semitic a later back migration. And in yellow it reads, according to Christy G. Turner II, there is archaeological and physical anthropological reason for a relationship between the modern Semitic-speaking populations of the Levant and the Natufian culture. So as you can see on the image to the left, or to the right, the various places where Afro-Asiatic and where Semitic could have originated from. And as we see from the readings that we just read, in red, there's a North African origin. In green, there is a now between the Nile Delta and Canaan origin. And in blue, a Ethiopian or Horn of Africa origin. And in yellow, a Levantine Natufian origin. But from an academic point of view, which one is the best? This is what we're going to find out today, using an Old Earth model. Remember what the Old Earth perspective is. Old Earth creationism, also known as OEC, is a form of creationism which includes day-age creationism, gap creationism, and progressive creationism. Broadly speaking, OEC, Old Earth creationism, occupies a middle ground between young Earth creationism, YEC, and theistic evolution, TE. Now, if you want to learn more about Old Earth creationism, I actually have a video that deals with Old Earth creationism and even young Earth creationism. But if you want a more deeper understanding of what it means, I have a playlist that deals with a very in-depth understanding of Old Earth creationism from various academics in the Abrahamic faith. But check these videos out for a more deeper, in-depth understanding. Again, this is in my playlist, Old Earth Creationism, as it is titled, and this will help you understand a little bit more about it. So we know that Semites are Afro-Asiatic people. We also know most Afro-Asiatics are Haplogroup E. As we said before, Afro-Asiatic, of or relating to or being a family of languages widely distributed over southwestern Asia and Africa, including Semitic, and Semitic, of relating to or consisting a subfamily of the Afro-Asiatic language family that includes Hebrew. And of course, the Israelites, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all the way to Shem, they are a Semitic people. And we know, according to this journal from Human Journal of Human Genetics, this paper says the Proto-Afro-Asiatic group carrying the E-P2 mutation may have appeared at this point in time and subsequently gave rise to the different major population groups including current speakers of the Afro-Asiatic languages and pastoralist populations. This was from Y chromosome E haplogroups, their distribution and implication to the origin of Afro-Asiatic languages and pastoralism. Therefore, this study will focus on haplogroup E as the marker of Semitic people. Therefore, our goal is to establish why haplogroup E is Proto-Semitic. This is important because Y DNA haplogroups are passed down from father to son. The genealogy of Israel is also passed down from father to son, just like a haplogroup would. As we know in Genesis chapter 11, this is the genealogy of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and begot Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. After he begot Arphaxad, Shem lived 500 years and begot sons and daughters. And then from Genesis chapter 11, 10 through 26, it reads, Arphaxad, Shelah, Eber, Peleg, Ru, Serg, Nahor. Now Terah lived 70 years and begot Abraham. This is a complete genealogy of a male lineage going back to Abraham to Shem. And this fits exactly with a haplogroup. Paternal haplogroups. The paternal haplogroup relates to your Y chromosome, and since that is the sex determining chromosome for men, it is passed down from father to son. As women don't have a Y chromosome, they will not have a paternal haplogroup by default. However, they are able to find out what their paternal haplogroup is if a male relative from the father's side, ideally a brother, father, uncle, or grandfather, is also tested. But the main thing you need to keep in mind is this. The paternal haplogroup relates to your Y chromosome. And since that is the sex determining chromosome for men, it is passed down from father to son. Just like the genealogy, going from Shem all the way down to Abraham, from Abraham all the way down to Isaac, a perfect male line lineage. Furthermore, our goal is to figure out the best likely genotype of Proto-Semites, as well as the point of origin from whence they originated. And again, this is from an old Earth perspective. With all that being said, let's begin. The Proto-Semitic Genome. The Proto-Semitic Genome. Now we are going to discuss the best likely Proto-Semitic genome. What is the likely ancient DNA makeup of an early Semite? First, we will discuss the two best likely locations for the origins of Proto-Semites. So there is the North African origin of Semites. This book, by the way, is from E. Lipsky, Semitic Languages, Outline of a Comparative Grammar, and it reads, this implies that the speakers of Proto-Semitic were still dwelling in Africa in the 5th millennium BC in the Neolithic Pluvial, which is from 5,500 through 3,500 BC, when the Sahara's climate was much wetter, so that erosion took place, as in other moist temperature and subtropical regions, and there was a proper system of rivers and vegetation consisting of grass with trees. A worsening of environmental conditions is indicated in North Africa, 3,500 BC, with disappearance of vegetation, a major funnel break of desertification and desertification. This might have been the period when the speakers of Proto-Semitic passed through the Nile Delta from the west to the east and reached Western Asia, where written documents of the 3rd millennium BC preserved noticeable traces of pre-Semitic and in Mesopotamia also pre-Sumerian substring. This is from Peter Solomon Kozlowsk. He says, in this group, many of us conclude that Haplogroup E is one of the major founding haplogroups of Semitic people, and that Haplogroup E people were the ones who brought Proto-Semitic languages out of the Afro-Asiatic homeland in northeast Africa into the Levant and Mesopotamia, just like that other source read. North Africa is one of the best primary candidates for the origins of Semites. Also, if this is the case, then Proto-Semites would likely have Haplogroup E. This is the most logical way to go about things. So there's also the Levantine Natufian origin of Semites. This also is the second best. This paper makes, and by the way, this book is from In Hot Pursuit of Language and Prehistory by John D. Bingston. And so it says, this paper makes an additional inference, since there is anthropological, archaeological, and physical anthropological reason to believe that the Natufians were related to modern Semitic-speaking peoples of the Levant. And this paper deals with the DNA of the Natufians. Paleolithic DNA from the Caucasus reveals core of West Eurasian ancestry, and so it reads, such a scenario would also explain the presence of Y chromosome haplogroup E in the Natufians and Levantine farmers, a common link between the Levant and Africa. Natufians are one of the best primary candidates for the origins of Semites, and if this is the case, then Proto-Semites would likely have Haplogroup E. So no matter where you put the origins of Proto-Semites, no matter where they emerged from, whether it's North Africa or the Levant, it would seem that they would still carry Haplogroup E. Therefore, you can make a strong case for Haplogroup E being Semitic, and many in academia do believe this. This is from a page called EUpedia. You can find this called Haplogroup E1b1b Y-DNA, and so it says E-M34 is the main Middle Eastern variety of E1b1b and is thought to have arrived with the Proto-Semitic people in the late Copper to early Bronze Age. Keeping with the understanding that Proto-Semites emerged from North Africa, there seems to be a very strong case for this. The closest modern descendants to Basal Eurasians are Middle Easterners, Arabians, and Bedouins. The closest ancient descendants to Basal Eurasians are Ibero-Maurusians, who are a Basal Eurasian North African population. Therefore, all Middle Easterners and the earliest Semitic populations had ancient North African DNA. And so this is a paper from Projecting Ancient Ancestry and Modern-Day Arabians and Iranians, a key role of the past, expose Arabo-Persian Gulf of human migration. So it reads, East Arabians also displayed the highest levels of the Basal Eurasian lineage of all tested modern-day populations. Not surprisingly, East Arabians are also the ones with higher similarity with Ibero-Maurusians, who are so far the best proxy for the Basal Eurasians amongst the known ancient specimens. Our results are strong evidence to include the exposed basin of the Arabo-Persian Gulf as plausible home of the Basal Eurasians to be investigated further, namely by researching ancient Arabian human specimens. So again, here's the map of where the Basal Eurasians are. And here's them trickling into North Africa. But it reads, also, ancient Ibero-Maurusian specimens could be in part descendants of Basal Eurasians, as they have a shared genetic affinity with early Heliocene Near Easterners. Best proxy are the Natufians, and 1/3 of input from Sub-Saharan Africans, a mixture between West and East Africans. Thus, so far, Southwestern Asia is still the best plausible homeland for the hypothetical Basal Eurasian population. Modern Saudi Arabia and Yemeni samples clustered tightly with a lower left quadrant overlapping with the three Natufian samples and were close to the Levant. PP and B, pre-pottery Neolithic B, and PP and C, pre-pottery Neolithic C, the Levant Bronze Age samples. A part of the modern UAE, United Arab Emirates, and Oman samples were more dispersed and mingled with North African Ibero-Maurusian and North African early Neolithic in accordance with some sub-Saharan input in their genomes. North African individuals, especially in Ibero-Maurusian samples, the same components were also found in parts of modern samples from the United Arab Emirates and Oman, together with a few individuals from Yemen. 2/3 of the West Arabo-Persian populations have ancestry shared with the Natufian, typical of the Levant, and the similarity with the Ibero-Maurusian was higher in the east rather than the west Arabo-Persians. The ancient Ibero-Maurusian sample included in the analysis was the one with the highest input of the Basal Eurasian lineage, even higher than the ones observed in modern East Arabo-Persian populations. Not surprisingly, cluster A bearing still a main cluster A bearing still a main 20% Sub-Saharan African mixture was in a close position to the Ibero-Maurusian sample. The Ibero-Maurusian had a main signal in the Levant and West Arabo-Persian coordinated with a high Ibero-Maurusian Natufian similarity, followed by East Arabo-Persian, probably the Basal Eurasian similarity. Our results reveal that the Eastern continuum was probably older given the stronger signal of the Basal Eurasian lineage and Ibero-Maurusians. In this side of the Arabo-Persian, definitely the Ibero-Maurusian specimens are the ones bearing a very high level of Basal Eurasian lineage, which could have been contributed by the Sub-Saharan African input added by the Southwest Asian founder group, which moved to North Africa 20,000 years ago, bearing a high Basal Eurasian component. It is interesting that the current day Southwest Asian populations that show more genetic sharing with Ibero-Maurusians are the East Arabo-Persian populations. Now, confirmed a still high portion of the Basal Eurasian lineage / Ibero-Maurusian founding effect in cluster D, East Arabo-Persian and Iranian, and F West Arabo-Persian, probably the Ibero-Maurusian specimens, and currently the best proxy for the Basal Eurasian population. The highest levels of Basal Eurasian lineage found in East Arabo-Persian Arabo-Persian reinforced previous genetic and archaeological evidence of early human settlement in the exposed basin of the Arabo-Persian Gulf. Thus, the exposed basin of the Arabo-Persian Gulf is a possible homeland of Basal Eurasians. And so here are charts that show the DNA of the Ibero-Maurusians and the modern populations who possess it. So as we can see, people in Yemen, Saudi Arabia, Oman, and the Arab Emirates have high levels of Ibero-Maurusian DNA, specifically in Oman and the United Arab Emirates. Here is Yemen and Saudi Arabia when it comes to Levant DNA, or PPNB. And so here's a map that will visually show you the areas that they're talking about. So as we can see in red, or in the A marker, this is dealing with the Ibero-Maurusians. And so as you can see right here in this light pink, I put in the red box, cluster A, and A will be over here. Basically the Persian Gulf and Oman, as they've been saying. These people have high amounts of Ibero-Maurusian DNA. And so here's another chart showing Ibero-Maurusian DNA, again in Oman and United Arab Emirates. And so, even the Natufians, the second best option for the origins of Semites, had this basal North African DNA. That's a very important thing to keep in mind. The Natufian sample, this is actually a paper dealing with the breakdown of the Natufian DNA. Basically, the Natufian sample consisted of 61% Arabian, but 21% North African. Keep in mind, this is dealing with ancient North African because the Natufians are a Neolithic people. Also, 10% Western Asian, 6% Omotic. But the key thing to keep in mind is that even the Natufians had this North African DNA. So, who are the Ibero-Maurusians? That's the first thing we need to know, because I mentioned these people a lot, but who are they? Like I said, they're basal North Africans, but what does this mean? So, the Ibero-Maurusian is a backed blade-slit lithic industry found near the coast of Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. So that's sort of where they reside. It would have lasted until the early Heliocene, and this is when the North Africa was green. Los Ginrich, its 2018 study, analyzed genome-wide data from 7 ancient individuals from the Ibero-Maurusian Grotte des Pigeons site near Tefort-Alt in northeastern Morocco. The scientists found that all males belong to Haplogroup E1b1b, common among Afro-Asiatic males. The male specimens with sufficient nuclear DNA preservation belong to the paternal haplogroup E1b1b1a1, M78, with one skeleton bearing the E1b1b1a1 parent lineage to E-V13. One male specimen belonged to E1b1b M215. These Y-DNA clades 24,000 years ago had a common ancestor with the Berbers and the E1b1b1 M123 subhaplogroup that has been observed in skeletal remains belonging to the Epipaleolithic Natufian and pre-pottery Neolithic cultures of the Levant. A two-way admixture scenario using Natufian and modern Sub-Saharan samples, including West Africans and the Tanzanian Hadza, as reference populations, inferred that the 7 Tayfolite individuals are best modeled genetically as of 63.5% Natufian related and 56.5% Sub-Saharan ancestry, with the latter having both West African-like, and Hadza-like ancestries. Y-DNA analysis shows that the Tafel males all belong to Y-DNA haplogroup E1b1b1a1 M78, which is closely related to E1b1b M213 subhaplogroup that has been observed in skeletal remains belonging to the Epipaleolithic, Natufian, and pre-Pottery Neolithic cultures of the Levant. Pleistocene North African genomes link Near Eastern and Sub-Saharan African human populations. We analyzed the genetic affinities of the Tafel individuals by performing principal component analysis (PCA) and model-based clustering of worldwide data when projected onto the two PCs of African and West Eurasian populations. The Tafel individuals form a distinct cluster in an intermediate position between present-day North Africans and East Africans. Consistently, we find that all males of sufficient nuclear DNA preservation carries Y haplogroup E1b1a1 M78. The closest related E1b1b1b M123 haplogroup has been reported for Epipaleolithic Natufians and pre-Pottery Neolithic Levantines. Unsupervised genetic clustering also suggests a connection of Tafel to the Near East. The three major components that comprise the Tafel genomes are maximized in early Paleocene Levantines, East African hunter-gatherers Hadza from north-central Tanzania, and West Africans. We calculated outgroups statistics of the form across worldwide ancient and present-day test populations. Consistent with previous analysis, we find that ancient Near Eastern populations, especially Epipaleolithic Natufians and early Neolithic Levantines, show the highest outgroup values with Tafel. When only the genetic variation of West Eurasians is taken into account to construct PCs, we find that Tafel individuals to fall outside the genetic variation of present-day West Eurasians, consistent with the global and African PCAs. The Tafel individuals form a tight cluster between Bedouins and East African nomadic groups. So as we could see from the study, the Ibero-Maurusians had Haplogroup E, and genetically they're close to the Natufians. Now, even when it comes to the latest origins of Semitic, linguists say there is an African origin and that ancestral Semites were between the African coast of the Red Sea and the Near East. This is from the Bayesian phylogenetic analysis of Semitic languages, identifies an early Bronze Age origin of Semitic in the Near East. So it reads, the evolution of languages provides a unique opportunity to study human population history. The origin of Semitic and the nature of dispersals by Semitic-speaking populations are of great importance to our understanding of the ancient history of the Middle East and the Horn of Africa. Our statistical tests of alternative Semitic history support an additional divergence of Akkadian from ancestral Semitic over competing hypotheses and African origin of Semitic. We estimate an early Bronze Age origin of Semitic approximately 5,750 years ago in the Levant, and further suppose that contemporary Ethio-Semitic languages of Africa reflect a single introduction of early Ethio-Semitic from southern Arabia approximately 2,800 years ago. Our analysis of the Semitic language family produced a dated phylogeny that estimates the origin of Semitic at approximately 4,400 through 7,400 YBP. These results indicate that the ancestor of all Semitic languages in our dataset was being spoken in the Near East no earlier than approximately 7,400 YBP, after having diverged from Afro-Asiatic in Africa. The discovery of such early Semitic languages could increase estimates of the age of Semitic and alter its geographical origin if these early Semitic languages were found in Africa rather than the Middle East. The map of Semitic languages and inferred dispersals. So as you can see on the left, showing the map, and it says the map also presents the dispersal of Semitic languages inferred from our study, an origin of Afro-Asiatic along the African coast of the Red Sea, supported by comparative analysis, is indicated in red, although other African origins of Afro-Asiatic have been proposed, southwest Ethiopia as an example. The assumed location of the divergence of ancestral Semitic from Afro-Asiatic between the African coast of the Red Sea and the Near East is indicated in italics. So as you can see right here, they have it in between Africa of the African side of the Red Sea and the Arabian side of the Red Sea. So it says our estimates for the origin of Semitic 4,400 through 7,400 YBP predates the first Akkadian inscription in the archaeological record of northern Mesopotamia by approximately 100 through 3,000 years. The city-states of Sumer were established and flourishing in Mesopotamia with their own indigenous languages unrelated to Semitic by approximately 5,400 YBP. So it is unlikely that Akkadian was spoken in Sumer for the entirety of the possible 3,000-year interval between the origin of Semitic and Akkadian's intentional appearance in the archaeological record. The presence of ancient members of the two oldest Semitic groups, East and West Semitic, in the same region of the Levant, combined with the possible long interval of 100 through 3,000 years between the origin of Semitic and the appearance of Akkadian in Sumer, suggests a Semitic origin in the northeast Levant, and later movement of Akkadian eastward into Mesopotamia and Sumer. So, these ancestral Semites would have carried Haplogroup E based on their movement from northeast Africa into the Levant and then later into Mesopotamia. It reads from this study, Genetics, Egypt, and History, Interpreting Geographical Patterns of Y Chromosome Variation. It says it can be postulated that select M35 carriers, speakers from Africa of a stage of ancestral Semitic, pre-Proto-Semitic, entered the Near East, kind of just like what we said earlier when it comes to the language. This book also covers it in Hot Pursuit of Language in Prehistory. And it says, the overall pattern is consistent with a model of the first speakers of Afro-Asiatic having emerged in or near Horn of Africa or the Nile Valley. The presence of Semitic in the Near East might be explained as follows. Early pre-Proto-Semitic speakers would have migrated into Syrio-Palestine before the Neolithic, being taken by their M35 bearers, specifically M35 and M78. Furthermore, early Semites, they basically would have been African, as many people have said, such as a conversation with Christopher Ehret at a university. He says, after all, the early Semites were just a few Africans arriving to find a lot of other people already in the area. So you do have linguists that literally say that Semites are just they're an African group. Here's another book covering it: Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. Greenberg determined that Semitic languages really form only one of 6 or more branches of a much larger language family, Afroasiatic. Even the Semitic subfamily itself is mainly African, 12 of its 19 surviving languages being confined to Ethiopia. This suggests that Afroasiatic languages arose in Africa and that only one branch of them spread to the Near East. Hence, it may have been Africa that gave birth to the languages spoken by the authors of the Old and New Testaments and the Quran, the moral pillars of Western civilization. Proto-Semites would have had Haplogroup E and Basal North African DNA. E-M34 is the main Middle Eastern variety of E1b1b and is thought to have arrived with Proto-Semitic people in the late Copper to early Bronze Age. We estimate that Semitic had an early Bronze Age origin in the Levant, followed by an expansion of Akkadian into Mesopotamia. This paper dealing with Semitic languages and this study dealing with Haplogroup E both align each other perfectly. Thus, from North Africa, wave after wave of Semitic migrations would have seemed to have set forth. The earliest of these migrants, and those who went furthest to the east, were the Akkadians, who journeyed along the Fertile Crescent through Palestine and Syria, and crossing over into Mesopotamia, reached northern Babylon circa 3000 BC, and founded the first Semitic empire at Kish. The southern Semites would have seemed to have reached the moisture highlands of Yemen and Hadramaut after 2000 BC, following the collapse of the early Bronze culture in Palestine, while the Ethiopians would have crossed over to the Horn of Africa when drier conditions prevailed in South Arabia, circa 15,000 through 500 BC. No matter where Proto-Semites emerged from, they would have basal North African DNA, Ibero-Maurusian, whether they come from North Africa or the Levant, because Natufians also had North African DNA. Doesn't matter where they come from, they still would have had this. Here's an image basically showing the Proto-Afroasiatic spread and origin, including the Proto-Semitic going into Northeast Africa into the Levant. The likely Proto-Semitic genome, whether the origins be North Africa or the Levant, basically they will have Y-DNA haplogroup E, basal North African DNA, and Neolithic Levantine / Natufian ancestry. This is what the genetic makeup would likely be. Conclusion. The two of the best scenarios for the origins of Proto-Semites is either Northern Africa or the Levantine Natufians. No matter where Proto-Semites came from, they would still have basal North African Ibero-Maurusian DNA. If Semites came from Natufians, they would still carry this North African DNA because Natufians also had this North African DNA. Therefore, modern Semitic populations still carry this Ibero-Maurusian DNA. Therefore, I would say that basal North African DNA can be an indicator of Proto-Semitic ancestry. Also, haplogroup E from a paternal lineage found among ancient Levantine populations is the best candidate for the Y DNA of Proto-Semites, since Semites expanded from the Levant and descend from PP&B Levantine Natufian populations, and that they had only haplogroup E. Again, East Arabians also displayed the highest levels of the Basal Eurasian lineage of all tested modern populations. Not surprisingly, East Arabians were also the ones with higher similarity with Ibero-Maurusians, who were so far the best proxy for the Basal Eurasians among known ancient specimens. Our results are our results are strong evidence to include the posited basin of Arabo-Persian Gulf as possible homeland of the Basal Eurasians to be investigated further on, namely by searching ancient Arabian human specimens. And the Natufians consisted of 61.2% Arabian and 21.2% Northern African. There goes your Northern African. And 10.9% Western Asian and 6.8% Omotic ancestry. And keep in mind that Northern African would likely be Ibero-Maurusian, ancient Northern African, because Natufians are ancient people themselves. And such a scenario would also explain the presence of Y chromosome haplogroup E in the Natufians and Levantine farmers, a common link between the Levant and Africa. Again, the two most likely origins for Semites, North Africa or the Levant. The Semitic family is a member of the larger Afroasiatic family, all of whose other 5 or more branches have their origin in North Africa or the Maghreb. Largely for this reason, the ancestors of Proto-Semitic speakers were originally believed by some to have first arrived in the Middle East from North Africa, possibly as part of the operation of the Saharan pump around the late Neolithic. That's the North African origin. Now for the Levant origin. According to Christy G. Turner II, there is an archaeological and physical anthropological reason for a relationship between the modern Semitic-speaking populations of the Levant and the Natufians. The Levant and North Africa are the two best origins for Proto-Semites. Remember, our goal is to figure out who are the ancient Israelites and their descendants today. Since the Israelites are an Afro-Asiatic Semitic people, we have to know the origins of Proto-Semites. Proto-Semitic populations would be the ancestors of the Israelites. And this is what we found out today. The two most best origins for the ancestors of the Israelites. North Africa or the Levant with the Natufians. As the genealogy goes, Israel are from Shem. They are Semitic. Their ancestors, Proto-Semites. And here is even the distribution of ancient Semitic and modern Semitic people. According to an old Earth perspective, the two best locations for the origins of Semites would be North Africa and Levant Natufians. Cannot stress this enough. With that being said, when it comes to the genome of Proto-Semites, the Israelites, and Israel's descendants, I expect to find a people with 1. Basal North African DNA. They should have some type of North African DNA. Since 1, if they're coming from North Africa, then obviously they're going to have North African DNA. But 2, if they're coming from Natufians, Natufians themselves had ancient North African DNA. So we should see Basal North African DNA. And we even see it in modern Middle Easterners today. The second thing we should find is Neolithic Levantine / Natufian DNA. This is something that Semites should have. Modern people who claim to be from Israel should have. We see Neolithic Levantine DNA in modern Middle Easterners. And if the Proto-Semites, if they came from North Africa, they have to pass through the Levant, where they would obtain Neolithic Levantine DNA. But if Semites originate from Natufians themselves, then obviously they would have this Neolithic Levantine Natufian DNA. So look for Natufian DNA. That's one thing that we'll be looking for. And of course, Y chromosome haplogroup E. As we've seen many times over and over again, most linguists and geneticists do allude to the fact that haplogroup E is a Proto-Semitic marker. It is a Semitic marker of ancient or ancestral or old Semitic populations. We see it if Semites were coming out of North Africa, or if Semites were even coming from the Levant. E would have been present. So when it comes to finding out the genome, again, the genome of Proto-Semites, the Israelites, and Israel's descendants, look for Basal North African DNA, Neolithic Levantine/Natufian DNA, and Y chromosome haplogroup E. This is for the Semitic side.